More of my interview with former Obama Attorney General Eric Holder. I asked Mr. Holder about moves by the Trump administration to walk back criminal justice reform and whether efforts to lessen penalties for some nonviolent offenders is effectively dead.
I hope that's not the case. I hope that people will, in law enforcement and people at the Justice Department, will look at the statistics, will listen to the police professionals who all say that, criminal justice reform is a good thing. And, it wasn't too long ago where this issue was supported by Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives. The opportunity was there, certainly in Congress, to pass some meaningful legislation in that regard. The comments, many of the comments made by the Attorney General and by the President are simply inconsistent with the facts. The notion that there is a crime wave out there, that we're in a period of American carnage. Again, inconsistent with the facts. We have crime rates that are at 40-year lows.
Overall, but in some cities they've gone up.
Yeah, they've gone up certainly in the last couple of years. And in every city, we want to make sure that we have measures in place to try to deal with those issues. But I lived through a time when I was the United States Attorney in Washington, D.C., when this city was called the murder capital of the country. And we're in a fundamentally different place now than we were in the early 90s. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't focus attention on those places where crime, violent crime in particular, is a concern. But I think we have to be careful in the language that we use and base policies on the evidence as it exists.
What do you say to voters out there who hear you and others talking about criminal justice reform and they think you just want to be soft on crime? You just don't want people who commit drug offenses to go to prison, but they're killing people in different ways just as much as somebody with a gun.
Well, criminal justice reform is not soft on crime. And what I would tell people first off is anytime you hear somebody say soft on crime, hold on to your wallet. That's a political slogan and really has little or nothing to do with good law enforcement. Criminal justice reform is about using the limited resources that exist in the law enforcement community in the most effective way to protect the greatest number of people. And it means putting violent offenders in jail for extended periods of time. It means looking at people who are doing things in a nonviolent way and trying to understand what is it that we can do to hold them accountable, but at the same time to make sure that they do not become repeat offenders.
I want to ask you about the federal court judge has just blocked the third version of President Trump's travel ban, calling it discriminatory. Some legal analysts think that this version, 3.0, because it includes some non-Muslim majority countries, Venezuela and North Korea, might actually pass constitutional muster. What do you think? Is it discriminatory on its face?
I have not really examined the new version of this, but the reason for it is something that I find pretty disturbing. I think this was something that is more politically driven than driven by a concern about the national security. And if one looks at the initial iteration of this and the need to have it in place quickly, that was months ago. And it's hard for me to understand why there is this, continuing need.
You had very strong views as an Attorney General. You were deferential to the President, as was most of the cabinet when it came to not getting out ahead of him. But I know you a little bit, and you're a very passionate progressive. Has it been difficult for you to hold your tongue so often, when Attorney General Sessions disagrees with you on so many issues across the board?
Yeah, it is difficult to do what I thought was good work, work that made the nation better, more fair, more just, and to see those policies being, taken apart is something that has been hard to watch. At the same time, I've tried to be respectful, and only when certain lines have been crossed have I raised my voice. But yeah, it's been a difficult thing to watch, and it means that I think I have to be a part of the resistance and to try to save as much of the great work I think that we did as is possible, and to try to ensure that we put in place leadership in 2018 and 2020 that will be supportive of the positive things that we did.
You remember the resistance?
Yeah, Yeah, I am. There's no question about that. You know, I'm a progressive Democrat, committed to the ideals of my party and proud of the work that I did as Attorney General.
And our thanks to former Attorney General Holder. Be sure to tune in tonight for a special live CNN debate. Senators Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz will debate the Republican tax plan. I'll moderate along with my CNN colleague Dana Bash. It all starts. Politics lead on Monday. President Trump falsely said that his predecessor, President Obama, did not phone families of service members killed in action. In response, President Obama's former Attorney General Eric Holder tweeted, quote, "Stop the damn lying. You're the president. I went to Dover Air Force Base with 44, that's Obama, the 44th president, and saw him comfort the families of both the fallen military and DEA. This afternoon, I spoke with Eric Holder about that tweet and about much more, including the controversy over President Trump's call with the widow of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson, who was killed in action in Niger."
Thank you so much for doing this. I want to ask you, there's this very uncomfortable situation going on right now when it comes to the president calling the grieving family of this soldier who was killed in Niger, one of the four, LaDavid Johnson, with a congresswoman and now supported by a member of the family saying that the president was not respectful, maybe didn't even know LaDavid Johnson's name. However it went down, that family did not leave that encounter feeling good. What's your reaction?
Those are tough calls to make. I had to make them myself, talking to the relatives of FBI agents, other agents, federal agents who had lost their lives in the line of duty. They're tough calls to make, but they're the kinds of things that you have to do if you want to lead, you know, certain organizations. I'm distressed to hear that the family did not feel that they were treated appropriately. Those kinds of interactions in some ways I think reveal you for who you are. Can you, as the leader of the organization, leader of the country, empathize with the person who has suffered, you know, the ultimate loss? Can you reach out? Can you comfort? That's something that I think is important in our leaders. And it bleeds over into other things. It shapes it's an indication of how you view the world and underlies, I think, you know, policy decisions that you're going to make that might be unrelated to the personal interaction. So that's distressing to hear. I don't know all the facts, but that, as reported, is distressing to hear.
This comes, of course, just a couple days after President Trump said, erroneously, that President Obama didn't phone the families of troops who had been killed in action. You tweeted directly to him that he should stop the damn lying. You're the president. You were tweeting to him directly, so I wanted to ask, if you had an audience with him, just one-on-one, what would you say to him about what he said about President Obama?
I would have said, Mr. President, you crossed the line there. And, you know, I understand you've got a tough job. I generally hold my powder. But that was a line that you crossed. It was an unfair thing. President Obama, you know, spent a great deal of time dealing with those issues, interacting with people who had suffered those kinds of losses, the relatives of people who had suffered those losses, and to imply that President Obama was not appropriately sensitive, not appropriately involved, was something that I was simply not going to allow to go unaddressed. That was not going to, that made me mad in a way that few other things have. And that's why I was as direct in that tweet as I was. And I would tell it, you know, I would tell the president the same thing, and in the same language that I used in that tweet.
Stop the damn lying.
Stop the damn lying, because it was a damn lie.
You worked with James Comey when he was at the FBI and you were the Attorney General. Mm-hmm. There's a newly released document suggesting that he had been working on his statement in May of 2016 before he ultimately cleared Hillary Clinton of any criminal wrongdoing later that summer. I know you've been critical of Comey for being as outspoken as he was during that press conference, and then also the Comey letter he wrote right before the election. President Trump tweeted that the memo that's been released, this newly released document, suggests that Comey wanted to clear Hillary Clinton, quote, long before the investigation was complete. What's your take on all this?
Well, I've been critical of Jim Comey, but I've also known Jim Comey for, 20, 30 years. He's an honest guy, and the determination that he made, and I think inappropriately announced, I think is based on the facts, based on his interpretation of the law, and it was nothing more than that. It was a good faith assessment by a person who I think has done a lot for this country.
What do you make of him working on this memo in May before he had even interviewed Hillary Clinton? Some of the president's supporters and President Trump himself are suggesting, see, the fix was in. He was never going to go after her criminally.
Well, assuming the facts are as you say, you can make determinations about where an investigation is likely to go before you actually speak to the subject of that investigation. That inquiry had been underway for an extended period of time. A lot of resources had been used, a lot of people had been spoken to, a lot of documents had been reviewed. And so you can get to, pretty close to the end of an investigation and understand where you're going to go with it before you actually talk to the subject of the investigation. And my guess is that's probably where Jim Comey was.
President Trump said that NFL players who take a knee should be suspended, that the league should suspend them. The NFL's declined recently to force players to stand during the national anthem, which the president this morning tweeted showed, quote, total disrespect for our great country. I believe you're a football fan and you have an opinion on this. What do you make of this controversy? And do you understand those who are offended when players take a knee during the anthem? There are a lot of, for instance, we were just talking about Gold Star families who feel it's offensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first I think that people, Gold Star families should not necessarily feel offended because the purpose of those demonstrations was not to disrespect people in the military, not to disrespect the flag. These are players using their First Amendment rights to express views about the interaction between people in law enforcement and communities of color. That's what the stated purpose of the protest is. Now, having said that, they certainly have that right, but people certainly also have the right to react to the way in which they perceive, these protests. I think that these protests really offer us an opportunity for some dialogue to talk about the underlying issue that the players were trying to raise. Let's talk about the way in which law enforcement interacts with certain communities in our country. If we do that, I think something positive can come out of this controversy. And I think, unfortunately, what the president's done here is to try to politicize something. He's trying to create a social wedge issue where there's really not the need. I think he could really do something positive with the controversy, and I think what he's chosen to do is to do something political.
We're going to have much more of my conversation with former Attorney General Eric Holder when we come back, including why he thinks the Trump administration's Justice Department is not being run well. Stick around. Breaking news in our worldly today, CNN has learned of yet another Russian-connected effort to exploit divisions in the United States, creating unrest. This one with a highly unusual twist. It turns out that the operatives posed as an African-American advocacy group, and they hired unwitting black Americans to further their cause. CNN senior investigative correspondent Drew Griffin has been digging into this and joins me now. Drew, how were these individuals targeted?
Take it as a strange tale, but CNN has learned a group associated with Russia tricked personal trainers and paid them to hold free self-defense classes that were aimed at African-American activists. In January of this year, well after the presidential election, New York martial arts instructor Amawale Adewale says he was contacted by a group called Black Fist, saying it would pay him to hold free self-defense classes for members of the black community.
Particularly, I would say, but not exclusively, for black people.
Did you ever think this is weird?
Yeah, a lot of times I thought it was weird.
Weird, but the money was good. $320 a month, paid direct through PayPal and Google Wallet, to teach just 4 classes, and Black Fist would promote it. What was also weird? No one from Black Fist ever showed up to meet him. His only communication was in text and faraway-sounding phone calls from this man named Taylor.
Yeah, hello, Wale. This is Taylor. I wanted to confirm the self-defense classes that we talked about last time.
The digital trail suggests the contact on the phone was most likely connected to Vladimir Putin's state-sponsored propaganda arm seeking to stoke racial tensions and disrupt the U.S. political system. CNN has confirmed the social media accounts connected to Black Fist are among the pages Facebook identified as coming from Russians, according to a source familiar with the matter. Links to those accounts appear on the Black Fist website. And Black Fist, which portrayed itself as an activist group seeking to empower black Americans, was likely developed inside the Russian troll factory in St. Petersburg, Russia.
Well, it's nuts. But the reality is, he didn't talk about any of those issues. And so that was really kind of what really happened. Like he really didn't talk about any.
There was no politics involved in this.
There was no politics.
Look at what Black Fist said about its self-defense classes. They are by black for black, and let them know that black power matters. Adeville's contact also wanted these videos and photos of blacks learning self-defense and the names and contacts for anyone who showed up.
They did want that information. They did? Actually, yes. They wanted names, they wanted numbers. And I did tell them that, I don't know if I can, get that.
Adewale wasn't the only one. Personal trainers and classes promoted in other cities, Los Angeles, Lansing, Michigan. According to Eventbrite and other pages where classes were being publicized, there were dozens. In Tampa, Florida, amateur boxer Chuck Jeton Jefferson says Black Fist found him through Instagram, offered to pay him $100 a class like Adewale through PayPal. He confirms it was the same voice on the other end of the phone call, the same demand for videos to prove classes took place. And though the entire setup sounded odd, he's having a hard time understanding why Russians were behind it.
So, I mean, when you have somebody that's going to pay you to do something you love, I mean, it's hard to see it like a negative thing. It's hard to see it in that light. But I mean, like I said, it was weird. It was different.
The Russian magazine RBC says dozens of other Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts were all part of the Russian Internet Research Agency. At its height, the troll factory had a reach of more than 70 million per week. And remember, Jake, this all started in January of this year, meaning the Russian propaganda campaign continued to operate even after the presidential election. Also alarming, just how easy this was to do, even after U.S. intelligence agencies knew Russia was meddling in U.S. social media networks. What we can't answer right now is why and what did the Russians have in the works. Jake?
So strange. Drew Griffin, thank you so much. He's watched as several of his policies and initiatives have been weakened or undone by the Trump administration. I'm going to talk to former Attorney General Eric Holder next about what he would say to President Trump if he got an opportunity to do so one-on-one. That's next.
Tonight.
Thanks, Brianna. The commander-in-chief facing off against the family of a man he sent into battle. The lead starts right now. It's the latest controversy in a story that should be about soldiers and sacrifice, but is now about President Trump. Now the family of a fallen soldier is going back and forth with the president and his aides about whether his attempt at condolences ended up offending them. Russian trolls infiltrating America and hitting some sensitive nerves on racial issues to stoke racial divisions. And now American citizens realizing they went along with it, apparently unknowingly. Plus, it has been a month, and millions of Americans still don't have clean drinking water or electricity in Puerto Rico, as CNN gets a rare and stunning perspective at the scope of the damage. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. We're going to begin with the politics lead today in another jam-packed day at the White House, a bipartisan health care deal that the president seemed to support just yesterday. He is now slamming today, seeming to effectively kill that deal before it even really got off the ground. But President Trump is making a push for his tax plan, meeting with members of the Senate Finance Committee this afternoon, all while dealing with the fallout from criticism from a Gold Star family that he dealt with them disrespectfully. Today, the president denying that he told the widow of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson that the soldier knew what he'd signed up for, saying Democratic Congresswoman Frederica Wilson of Florida, who's close with the family and listened to the president's call on speakerphone, fabricated the claim. The mother of Sergeant Johnson told CNN that the Congresswoman's account was very accurate. The White House today said they dispute that version of events and that Chief of Staff Kelly and others were listening to the call. An uncomfortable back and forth, and sadly at the center of it, a tragic loss and a family in pain. CNN's Jeff Zeleny starts us off today from the White House.
President Trump embroiled in a firestorm over his condolence call to the grieving widow of an American soldier killed in Niger.
Didn't say what that Congresswoman said. Didn't say it at all.
Today at the White House, the president spoke about his call Tuesday to Maisha Johnson. She's the pregnant wife of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson, who mourned the loss when his flag-draped casket arrived home in Florida. The soldier's mother and Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who both listened to the call, told CNN the president disrespected Sergeant Johnson by saying he knew what he signed up for. The president denied using those words, saying on Twitter that Wilson totally fabricated what I said to the wife of a soldier who died in action, and I have proof. Sad. He did not provide proof as the controversy escalated between the commander-in-chief and the family of a fallen soldier.
I did not say what she said. I had a very nice conversation with the woman, with the wife, who sounded like a lovely woman. Did not say what the Congresswoman said, and most people aren't too surprised to hear that.
What is the proof, Mr. President?
Let her make her statement again, and then you'll find out.
Wilson, a Florida Democrat, stood by her account. The soldier's mother also telling CNN the Congresswoman's recollection was very accurate. When asked if she was shocked by the president's words, the Congresswoman said this.
Stunned, still stunned. So insensitive. So insensitive. Mr. Trump is crazy.
The extraordinary feud did little to shed light on what actually led to the ambush that killed Johnson and 3 other American soldiers in West Africa. For the president, it's the deadliest combat incident involving U.S. troops since taking office. Asked earlier why he didn't address the attack for nearly 2 weeks, the president falsely claimed his predecessors did not contact the families of fallen troops.
If you look at President Obama and other presidents, most of them didn't make calls.
It was another mark against his credibility as he tries to breathe new life into his stalled legislative agenda. Today, the president abruptly reversed course on health care. After signaling his support Tuesday for a bipartisan deal over Obamacare subsidies.
For a period of 1 year, 2 years, we will have a very good solution, but we're going to have a great solution ultimately for health care.
He all but withdrew his support for the agreement.
We're going to see the bipartisan, and Lamar Alexander's working on it very hard from our side. And if something can happen, that's fine. But I won't do anything to enrich the insurance companies, because right now the insurance companies are being enriched.
Now back to that Niger attack about 2 weeks ago. Senator John McCain, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, said that they are not getting all the information that they need about what actually led to this ambush. Asked a short time ago on Capitol Hill if the Trump administration was being forthcoming and all it knew about this, Senator McCain's answer was no. Jake?
All right, Jeff Zeleny at the White House. Thank you so much. The loss of a service member and the pain of his or her family is part of life in this nation that we at the lead try to treat with appropriate sensitivity and respect. Now, we do not know what exactly President Trump said to Maisha Johnson, the grieving widow of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson. Congresswoman Frederica Wilson claims the president said, quote, he knew what he signed up for, but I guess it still hurt, unquote, that the president did not seem to know Johnson's name. And the Congresswoman further suggested that the president's words caused the widow to break down after the call ended. Johnson's mother tells CNN that that description is accurate. The president, however, on Twitter and to reporters, denies this. He tweeted he had proof, and the White House today said that Congresswoman Wilson was trying to politicize a call to a widow and that those who heard the call on the White House staff found the president's words perfectly respectful. I mean, all of that really makes very little difference when you think about it. The family heard what it heard. Even if the president was completely misunderstood, his attempt at comfort failed. Under the best of circumstances, these moments between a commander-in-chief and the family of a fallen service member are awful, just awful. And the problem that President Trump might have here, however, is that when it comes to sensitivity about service and sacrifice specifically, he's already made what critics have assessed to be some grievously bad decisions. You go back to 2015, his attack on Senator John McCain, who spent 5.5 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. McCain was tortured, he was despondent, at times he was suicidal. As the son and grandson of admirals, he would have been allowed. He was asked to leave early as a propaganda effort by the North Vietnamese, but McCain refused to do it in deference to the POWs who had been there longer. But this is how Trump saw it.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? I hate to tell you.
Then, of course, there's Khizr and Ghazala Khan, the Gold Star parents of Army Captain Humayun Khan, who was killed in Iraq. He belittled them after their appearance at the Democratic Convention, after they took issue with Mr. Trump's anti-Muslim rhetoric. Then candidate Trump suggested that a fallen soldier's mother didn't speak at the convention because she was forbidden as a Muslim woman to speak. In actuality, as she later said, she was just too broken up to discuss the loss of her fallen son. Shortly after his inauguration, during a visit to the CIA, the president stood in front of the memorial wall there, where there are now etched 125 stars for fallen CIA officers, including one for former Navy SEAL Christopher Mueller, who saved the line of an Afghan commander before sacrificing his own. Another one for former Marine Major Douglas Zembiec, the so-called Lion of Fallujah, who was killed in Iraq. The president spent his time at the CIA in front of that wall, railing about media coverage of the size of the crowds at his inaugural.
It looked, honestly, it looked like 1.5 million people, whatever it was, but it went all the way back to the Washington Monument. And I turned on the thing, and by mistake.
Amidst all this ham-handedness, the president this week falsely accused President Obama and previous presidents of never having phoned Gold Star families, in an apparent attempt to make himself look more attentive and compassionate, I suppose. And in the midst of that effort to depict himself in a glowing light, this current controversy, ironically enough, sadly burst onto the scene as just another political weapon used by the president and used against the president. This most personal and horrific experience, just one more piece of ammunition in the snark wars where nothing matters anymore except for scoring points. Instead of focusing on these fallen men and women and their families who will never be the same, we're focused on process and phone calls and letters and the spat. President Trump, when challenged on the fact that President Obama did actually call Gold Star families, not all of them, but some of them, he told one radio interviewer the following.
You could ask General Kelly, did he get a call from Obama?
And that's a reference to his chief of staff, retired Marine General John Kelly. Kelly and his wife Karen lost their son, Marine First Lieutenant Robert Michael Kelly, to a landmine in Afghanistan in 2010. And truly, what will honor the Kellys and the memory of Robert more than anyone debating whether Obama should have phoned them instead of writing them a letter is to take a moment to consider Robert Kelly and all of the men and women who serve our nation while considering these words, quote, "Sons like yours who serve are men and women of character who continue to believe in this country enough to put life and limb on the line without qualification and without thought of personal gain, and they serve so that the sons and daughters of the other 99% don't have to. No big deal, though, as Marines have always been the first to fight, paying in full the bill that comes with being free for everyone else," unquote. Those were the words of General John Kelly at a Veterans Day event for Marines in 2010. And what makes those words most remarkable, perhaps, is that he delivered that speech just 4 days after his beloved son Robert was killed. Now, I've learned on this job that telling the stories of troops and their families, that it's very important that we all choose our words very carefully when discussing these losses. And it's not just journalists and politicians. All of us need to consider the unimaginable that these families go through when we speak to them and when we speak of them. And if you don't take great care, and in fact, if you're reckless about these kinds of sacrifices, the kind of sacrifice you see on your screen right now, well, then people might not be willing to give you the benefit of the doubt if on one occasion your words come out wrong. Also in politics today, Attorney General Jeff Sessions pushing back in sometimes tense exchanges on Capitol Hill with his decision-making under review. Sessions not only defended his conversations with Russian officials during the 2016 campaign, but he also found a way to explain why he told this same exact Senate Judiciary Committee back in January that he had no contacts with any Russians. CNN's Manu Raju is on Capitol Hill for us. And Manu, Sessions also said he would not discuss any of his private conversations with the president, which proved to be somewhat frustrating when the panel was trying to find out more about Sessions' role in firing James Comey as FBI director.
Yeah, no question about it. He actually did not assert executive privilege, but he said these conversations with the president were confidential and he should not be forced to disclose these private discussions, something that really frustrated Democrats on the panel. And afterwards, I talked to one Democrat, Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, who said the only way to get to the bottom of this is to have Jeff Sessions be interviewed by special counsel Robert Mueller, something that Sessions said he has not done just yet.
For the first time as Attorney General, Jeff Sessions returned to the committee where he served as a senator, and Democrats did not give him a warm reception.
You're saying you are privileged?
At the heart of the dispute was Sessions' testimony during his confirmation hearing in January, when he said he had no contacts with Russians during the campaign season. After press reports later revealed he did, Sessions acknowledged interacting multiple times with then Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak, but said there was nothing to it.
You subtly changed your story. Since you have qualified your denial to say that you did not, quote, discuss issues of the campaign with Russians, what, in your view, constitutes issues of the campaign?
I conducted no improper discussions with Russians at any time regarding a campaign or any other item facing this country.
May I suggest that...
No. You had a long time, Senator Franken. I'd like to respond. But I don't have to sit in here and listen to his...
You're the one who
charges without having a chance to respond. Give me a break.
Today, Senator Patrick Leahy said his former colleague may have misled the committee.
My concern is you were part of the Russian facade and went along with it. And I'm sorry. I've known you for years.
It did hurt me to say you think I'm part of a facade. I'm not part of a facade.
Sessions was also asked if special counsel Robert Mueller interviewed him as part of his Russia inquiry. He paused for several seconds before answering.
Well, I'd be pleased to answer that. I'm not sure I should without clearing that with a special counsel. What do you think?
I'm just asking, have you been interviewed by them?
No.
But Sessions did not answer many questions, particularly about his conversations with Trump over the firing of FBI Director James Comey and whether the president fired him to end the Russia probe.
Did the president ever mention to you his concern about lifting the cloud on the Russia investigation?
Senator Feinstein, that calls for a communication that I've had with the president, and I believe it remains confidential.
Still, Sessions did not hesitate to criticize Comey for his handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation.
I don't think it's been fully understood the significance of the error that Mr. Comey made on the Clinton matter.
The chairman of the committee, Chuck Grassley, said many questions about Sessions' contacts with Russians could be cleared up if the FBI simply briefed the committee.
The FBI did not do that. And now we have conflicts that I think could have been avoided.
And Jake, in some breaking news in the Russia investigation, we are now learning that Corey Lewandowski, the former Trump campaign manager, privately met with the Senate Intelligence Committee investigators behind closed doors today in discussing the Russia investigation. Lewandowski, of course, was on the campaign payroll at the time of some of the meetings that occurred with Russian officials, including the June 2016 meeting in which Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner had attended a meeting with Russian operatives in Trump Tower. It's really unclear whether or not he knew anything about it. Lewandowski said he really has no knowledge of that. We have not heard back from Lewandowski, but we have learned he's the latest Trump figure to be interviewed by the Senate Intelligence Committee. Jake.
All right, Manu Raju, thank you so much. Breaking news now about how Russians tricked unwitting Americans and hired them in an attempt to stir up racial tensions in the United States. That story's next.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions made his highly anticipated return trip to Capitol Hill today to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee after being grilled earlier this year by his former colleagues. Sessions back in the hot seat, questioned about the Russia probe, what he knew, and when he knew it.
saying I didn't discuss interfering with the election is your last statement. That's a very different bar than I can tell you I did not meet with any Russians.
You have now gone through this long talk that I believe is totally unfair to me. It all arose from this question. When it was charged that these documents allegedly say, quote, there was a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump's surrogates, as if all of them, Trump's surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government. Isn't that what you said? You're shaking your head.
No, don't all Trump's surrogates.
It said Trump's surrogates. Didn't say some of. Said his surrogates. And I felt a need to respond.
With me now is Asha Rangappa. She's a CNN legal and national security analyst. She's also a former FBI special agent. And Asha, Sessions was questioned about a lot of topics. Russia really dominated here. And one of the things that was so interesting was that he repeatedly was asked to talk about his conversations with the president. I'm sure you heard his response to a number of those. Let's play one of these exchanges. It was with Vermont Democrat Patrick Leahy.
Have you discussed with him any policies or positions of the campaign or Trump presidency?
I'm not sure about that. If I met with the Russian ambassador after I gave a speech at the Republican convention, he was right in front of the speakerphone, and we had we had an encounter there. I don't think there was any discussion about the details of the campaign, other than it could have been that in that meeting in my office or at the convention that some comment was made about what Trump's positions were. I think that's possible.
Explain the reason, Asha, that he says he can't disclose.
So the lack of disclosure, he's essentially preemptively trying to invoke some kind of privilege. So I'm talking about the Comey, not answering the questions about anything that happened with Comey. And then he has this other aspect about the Russians, which kind of gets to conflicting testimony that he gave earlier. So in terms of asserting that he can't talk about confidential communications with the president, he's alluding to an executive privilege, and that's a privilege that has to be invoked by the president. It's not something that Sessions can do on his behalf. And we saw this back in June. He kind of did the same thing, and he's had time now, and I believe that the committee asked Sessions to let the committee know whether the president was invoking this privilege, and they didn't get an answer on that. So it's kind of a game of congressional who's on first, and just going in circles, because it's not moving along the process that is in place when there is a conflict between the executive branch and Congress about what can be disclosed and what can't.
I have 1 minute here, Asha, so I want to get your input on this thing, though, which is that he said to this committee he has not been interviewed by the special counsel, by Robert Mueller. What'd you make of that?
I don't know that that's entirely surprising. Mueller is going to be moving in a very methodical way, and I think that he's going to be getting as much information as he can about the big picture before he goes and interviews the principals in the investigation, who really because he's going to want to know the answers to the questions before he asks them. That's really important in an investigation. So I don't know that it's entirely surprising that he hasn't yet interviewed Sessions. I did find it a little surprising that Sessions wasn't really sure whether Mueller had made the request or not. It seems like that would be a top priority in terms of knowing, even though he's recused from it formally, knowing what stage Mueller might be in terms of bringing in Sessions into the investigation.
We're certainly curious about that. Asha Rangappa, thank you so much to you. And The Lead with Jake Tapper starts right now.
Thanks, Brianna. The commander-in-chief facing off against the fan
on President Trump's stunning health care flip-flop. The White House is weighing in this hour on Trump reversing his endorsement of a bipartisan deal less than 24 hours after he praised the same deal. Here it is.
We've said all along that we want something that doesn't just bail out the insurance companies, but actually provides relief for all Americans. And this bill doesn't address that fact. So we want to make sure that that's taken care of. We think that this is a good step in the right direction. This president certainly supports Republicans and Democrats coming to work together, but it's not a full approach, and we need something to go a little bit further to get on board. He wants to lower premiums. He wants to provide greater flexibility. He wants to drive competition. He likes the idea of block grants to states. Those are a lot of the ideas that he'd like to see in a health care plan.
So Trump tweeting today about the deal that was reached between Republican Lamar Alexander and Democrat Patty Murray. And he said, quote, "I am supportive of Lamar as a person and also of the process, but I can never support bailing out insurance companies who have made a fortune with Obamacare." Alexander says he and the president absolutely agree that these subsidies, these cost reduction subsidies, should benefit consumers and not insurance companies. He said, "I will work with the president to see if we can make it even stronger." Okay, well, let's talk this over with our panel. We have Lauren Fox, CNN congressional reporter, and we also have Crystal is a CNN politics reporter and editor at large. Lauren, my goodness, you could just suffer from whiplash here after John Thune, a key Republican senator, said this is now, quote, stalling out.
Absolutely. And what you have to remember is that so much of this deal's support was based on whether or not the president was going to get behind it. Republicans on Capitol Hill are thinking that it may not be the best idea to stabilize Obamacare, a law that they've been campaigning against, a law they said they were going to repeal and replace. But if President Donald Trump would have come out strongly and said, "I need you to do this. It's very important for the next 2 years to stabilize the insurance market," surely Republicans on Capitol Hill would have at least listened to that advice. Now, with the back and forth, it makes it very hard to see how Capitol Hill could move forward with something like this.
Yeah, Chris, where does this go?
I mean, I think that John Thune is sort of indicating where it goes, which is unless they change it, it goes nowhere. The only way.
But it seems like healthcare is this zombie, right? That always just kind of comes back. So are we going to see some reincarnation?
Yes, I think we will see something, Brianna, but the question is what and could it possibly pass? I mean, I think we know by now, despite the president saying every day to the contrary, I think we know by now there are not 50 Republican votes for any form that has been presented of repeal and replace of Obamacare, right? I feel like we've learned that lesson. Now the question is there a way to sort of mend the market, the insurance markets, mend Obamacare for the near term, a Band-Aid until they try repeal and replace again? That's what we thought the bill Lamar Alexander and Patty Murray were putting forward might do. The truth of the matter with the president is I think he likes, you saw Sarah Sanders talk about this, he likes the idea of bipartisanship. He just didn't know it was in the bill. And so when the fact that the bill put the subsidies that he had taken out back in, it's going to be very hard for him to be for it. So,
but I mean, that's like unforgivable that he doesn't even know what is in there, right? Lauren, I mean, you have one Republican aide who's saying, you know, what else is new? He changes positions 6 times before noon. But it seems, Lauren, this just really speaks to the problem that his own party has trying to work with him because they're trying to construct legislation essentially on quicksand.
Well, absolutely. And Senator Chuck Schumer has said to reporters today that this is why it's so hard to cut a deal with the president. This happened on immigration. And remember, they're going into a huge tax reform battle in the upcoming months, and it's going to be very hard for even Republicans in Trump's own party to support the president if they don't know exactly what he's asking them to do. And if they come out with a plan and then the president turns around and says, well, you know what, I still want a corporate tax rate at 15%, that 20% you're looking at, it's just not good enough for me anymore.
And by the way, Brianna, just quickly to that point, I think 2 things. One, the hardest thing for congressional Republicans with Trump is not the tweeting, it's the unpredictability, right? So that's number one. They just don't know what he's going to do. Number 2, if past his prologue, they have a lot of reason to be skeptical of what he says. Remember that he pushed for the Republican version of repeal and replace in the House. It finally passed the House. Then he was quoted as saying it's mean. Right? When they were working
after
through
he had
the Senate.
a huge Rose Garden kind of assembly for it.
if you're a member of Congress, you look at that and think, geez, to Lauren's point about the corporate tax rate, okay, he says 15% now. Look, he may well change that halfway through once it's already passed one of these chambers. Again, it's about predictability. They have no idea on a daily basis, not what he's going to tweet, yes, that's a problem, but what he's going to say or change his view on as it relates to policy, and that makes making policy almost impossible.
It makes me think, as I say goodbye to both of you, it's like herding cats, I think, being part of Congress. This is like herding cats on a treadmill. It's just nuts. Lauren Fox, Chris Cillizza, thank you so much to both of you. We appreciate it. The other big issue at hand, prudential. It's been 2 weeks since that ambush in Niger that left 4 U.S. soldiers dead, and now the Defense Department is launching an investigation to find out what happened on the ground and why these 4 men walked into a terrible ambush. Multiple U.S. officials describe a scene of confusion during the October 4th attack that involved some 50 ISIS-affiliated fighters near the border of Mali. I want to bring in Barbara Starr. She's our CNN Pentagon correspondent. Barbara, you have some new reporting about the evacuations that came after the ambush.
We do indeed, Brianna, and let's, as you just said, recall that 2 weeks later, we are still learning new information from the U.S. military, which is trying to investigate all this, put together a timeline of what happened hour by hour. But now we are told by the U.S. Africa Command that, in fact, a private contractor aircraft, private aviation, under contract to the U.S. military in West Africa, went in after the firefight and evacuated the dead and the wounded. Until now, we had only been told that French helicopters, French military helicopters went in, and of course they would have been armed. We still believe it is the case that they went in and also evacuated some, but what we're trying to find out, and this is a very key point, did both the contractor plane, which is not armed, and the French military helicopter evacuate dead and wounded Americans? Did both of those aircraft have good communication? Quite bluntly, did they do a nose count? Did they know how many people they were supposed to evacuate? And did they have them all when they lifted off from that area? Because LaDavid Johnson got left behind for 48 hours. And the major question is what happened to him, how he became separated, and how nobody was able to recover his body until the Nigerians found him 48 hours later. So this new information that an unarmed contractor plane went in to try and help and in fact evacuate some of the dead and wounded adds to the puzzle, adds to the questions being asked. What we know is that Defense Secretary James Mattis is pressing very hard for answers about all of this. What was the intelligence? How could the 12-man team led by Green Berets walk into an ISIS ambush? And perhaps most importantly, how did Sergeant LaDavid Johnson get left behind? Brianna?
And Barbara, we have just gotten word that Senator John McCain is saying the administration isn't being forthcoming about what's going on. What is the concern here from people like John McCain and others who feel like they just aren't getting answers?
Well, let me put it this way. We are 2 weeks past this event. It has a good deal of human tragedy for military families. And beyond those, the 4 that were killed, you have 2 wounded in hospital. You have 6 others as part of the team back at Fort Bragg, obviously having been through a terrible battle. You have military families all over the country that are watching all of this unfold and wondering what happened, because you have to think that certainly they have questions about the service of their loved ones. I think you cannot underestimate really the concern about somebody being left behind on the battlefield. Does it happen? Occasionally, I can think of a couple of cases in the heat of battle during the worst times in Iraq and Afghanistan when perhaps it happened. But remember, these guys weren't even supposed to be in combat. They were going to help train and advise local African forces. They were going to go visit a village where they had been before with no problems. Was ISIS watching them? Were they complacent potentially in their operations? We don't know. We're not suggesting that. But these are some of the questions that people have about what happened. And how is it, 2 weeks later? I can tell you that today here in the Pentagon, from 2 sources I have heard that Defense Secretary Mattis still wants answers, and he still wants them 2 weeks after this battle took place, Brianna.
Lots of questions unanswered. Barbara Starr, thank you so much. I should also say that Jake Tapper is going to have more on this coming up. Plus, we have some more breaking news. After the president reverses his endorsement on a bipartisan health care deal, one Republican just said the deal has stalled out. Democrats are now expressing their extreme frustration in trying to work with Republicans.
This president keeps zigging and zagging, so it's impossible to govern.
Tonight, reporting of the president's call with the widow of a soldier killed in Niger, even though he teased proof that contradicts a lawmaker's account and also the account of the slain soldier's mother, that he told the widow he knew what he signed up for. The president also suggested he has called or contacted every family member, family of a military member killed in action. But when challenged, the White House says he has done so based on the information that the White House military office has given to him. There are some families who...
And we stand united.